I think we can get started. So welcome everybody. My name is Vincent Medley. I'm the Maddie's director for the Human Animal Support Services Project. And before we get started with tonight's panel on diversity, equity, and inclusion in animal welfare, let me give you a few housekeeping notes. A couple of things in Zoom. We are asking everyone, if you have a question, put the question in the Q&A rather than the chat. We want you to use the chat, but we want you to use the Q&A if you have a question. As far as the chat, we want you to use that throughout the presentation. The only thing we ask is that you keep your chat on topic with what we're discussing today. And then also just have that, just the mutual respect and be respectful in your comments and your questions. And you'll see me in the chat. You'll probably see you'll see the staff that I want to acknowledge, Sarah Miller and Aaron Tabor, who are supporting this webinar and do such a fine work and produce the webinar. And without the two of you ladies, the webinar wouldn't even be possible. So thank you so much. Also, let me, this chat, let me finish up with the chat rules. So when you're in chat, we ask that you stay on topic, but also if you want to talk to all of us, please make sure you have selected everyone in the little tab for chat. Otherwise, you're going to be direct messaging someone, which is okay too, but just keep that in mind. Also, just to be aware that this webinar is being recorded and will be distributed 3 business days to the email that you registered with. If you do not see it in your inbox within 3 days, be sure to check your spam or visit us at humananimalsupportservices.org/webinars. And then lastly, please stay tuned to fill out a brief poll at the very end of the webinar. All right. So I am so excited about this webinar, and let me introduce a panel of people that all of whom I know and have such deep respect for their work and and who they are as individuals. So for tonight's panelists on inclusivity in action, strategies for DEI and animal welfare, we will have the opportunity to speak with a selection of incredible experts. And I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Mia.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mia Navedo-Williams. I'm with Best Friends Animal Society, and I'm the Senior Manager of Multicultural Engagement. So my job really is to speak externally to multicultural audiences, but I have a direct line really to DEI since they're both very much interconnected. So I'm very happy to be here to speak on this topic.
Nice. All right. And Shakela, we will go with you next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shakela Brown from the Humane Rescue Alliance. I'm the Director of Community Outreach for the Humane Rescue Alliance. And I have a different perspective. I'll be coming more from, not necessarily from our humane human resource part, but from the part of like the employee part of it, and also how it affects the community.
Nice. Thank you. And Rory, last but not least.
Thank you, Vincent. What an awesome panel. I'm so honored to be here. I'm Rory Adams. I am the Senior Manager of Adoption Initiatives at PetSmart Charities. I've been here about 3 months and in animal welfare for quite a long time. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. And of course, this is such a great panel. And I'd like to ask for those of you that are have joined us, if there's anything you'd like to discuss, you can please put that in the Q&A too, if you like for us to discuss or to address when it comes to DEI issues, because we know that these are, there's varying levels of experience and interaction in this space. And so we want to make sure that we are able to get your any issue you have answered. Our job here tonight is just to be authentic and open about what our experiences have been, and then also how, for effective ways to address certain issues. So, all right, so let me start with the panel. I'm going to ask you all of you to answer this question in whatever order you decide. Tell us, what are some effective strategies for creating an inclusive and welcoming environment for underrepresented communities within the animal welfare organization? Share whatever you feel comfortable with sharing. Or, and in fact, let me back up. Why don't we talk to us a little bit about your experience and background and how that relates to this question?
Okay, I guess I'm going. I'm fairly new to animal welfare. I was really more of a volunteer working on the for-profit side. I kind of got, as a volunteer, I noticed that there was missing a lot of information. A lot of the clients that came into our vet clinic spoke Spanish. I noticed that there was a big gap in information available to Spanish speakers, especially around spay and neuter, around just general care for pets. And so when I saw that gap, I was like, wow, this is big, because this is a huge community. It's an up and coming community. I had been working in DEI and multicultural, in 2004, and I was really seeing these clients, not too much after that. So I knew the background. I knew that multicultural audiences were growing at a rapid pace. And I saw that animal welfare had a huge gap in how they were really not approaching any multicultural communities. So, there were so many resources on the web, but nothing that showed Black or Brown folks, nothing that had information for Spanish speakers. So it really honestly surprised me. And I thought, if there ever came an opportunity to work in animal welfare, where, because it was tough raising two kids on one salary, and nonprofit, we don't come here for the paycheck. So that's really how I got into it, was seeing that the inequity in lack of materials, lack of representation. So when there was an opening at Best Friends to really identify for the organization what is multicultural, I took it, because there was still, 2 decades later, there was still this gap. So to me, it was an opportunity to bring a wealth of information that had been out in the for-profit space for decades, but really had never made it into the nonprofit space, much less animal welfare. So from that perspective, when I came in, it was really about really introducing what multicultural has been, how it was really, was born with DEI, the importance of belonging, the importance of inclusion, and that, really showing data, right? That this is what communities are going to look like. And if we're going to stay relevant, and if we want to save lives, we're going to have to begin to not only look like the communities that we serve, but we're going to have to, really come to the table with resources that have never been developed before, and now is the time. So that's really where the place I'm coming from.
Nice. All right. What about you, Shakela?
Well, so I've been with the Humane Rescue Alliance / the Washington Humane Society. It'll be 29 years in October. So I've kind of seen what it looked like before we actually now have the because we have a REI program that our human resource team works very hard for staff members. And so I've seen when we didn't have, I'll say, first of all, just how we affect the community was one thing, because to me, the REI, DEI work not only for in-house, but it's also for the community. So me coming from being there for so long and, you know, going through different positions, but seeing how we like investigated like animal cruelty cases, the animal control cases, and people coming to the shelter, the adoptions. So I kind of saw how we, over the years, we've changed, and even now we're still changing to be better, to really to try to address some of the issues dealing with, again, like we have REI, we don't have DEI, we have REI because we are mostly African Americans that work at the shelter in different positions. So HRA has started with that. So I think it's very important to look at the staff that you have, which is what they've have done these past 2-3 years, is to look at the staff that is working there and starting to work on different development things and things that can assist staff members, but also the population that we also work with and who we're trying to reach and also help.
And Rory.
Yeah, so I'm a queer trans person, and you know, I come to animal welfare with a background in social justice, and was really swept away by social justice as a young queer person when I learned what queer meant, which, you know, I think for me is really like a rejection of assimilation, and also, you know, just this place where intersectionality happens. One of my like absolute favorite quotes from a Black scholar, Audre Lorde, is "There's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives." And I think that for me, like that really resonates with how I try to come at this space. Like I'm a white person, I'm a trans person. Privilege changes depending on like where I am, whether that's like virtual, in person. And I think, you know, I've been really hopeful that animal welfare would become more equitable and more invested in inclusion. And I think we've seen that over the last few years. And I think a lot of us started having more and more conversations the more space there was to have those conversations. So been having them, been trying to have them, and now there's even more space. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think it does. And, you know, it's interesting to listen to all three of you, and to just give the audience a little background on myself. You know, when it comes to these issues, you know, most of the shelters that I was either a supervisor or the director of were mostly BIPOC shelters. And so I felt really insulated in a lot of respects from some of the issues amongst the staff and employees. But it felt like the further outside of the organization I went, the worse it got, or the higher up in the organization I went, the more I noticed that those issues were like really apparent. And I'm wondering from you all, well, and I'll say this last part. And I also come from a nonprofit background where I was in AmeriCorps for 2 years, working in the community, and also for the Black Community Crusade for Children, that is headquartered in Washington, D.C. with the Children's Defense Fund. And I didn't, when I got into animal welfare, I didn't really bring that experience to like that. I didn't use that to inform my work. And I wonder if all of you have similar experience where it was hard to really use that. Now I do, but in the beginning I didn't. Can we talk a little bit about that, if that's something that I see you shaking your head, Rory, so I'll call on you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely have had similar experiences. I think, again, the more space that we make for equity work and anti-oppression and anti-racist work, the more anti-racist work will happen within our organizations, and the more equitable work will happen. So I definitely had that experience where, you know, when I started in animal welfare, I was not talking nearly as much about being a trans person. I remember the first time, I mean, people within my community knew that I was very open about being a trans person, and it informs my experience and it informs my everyday life and how I relate to people and my kindness. But I remember the first time I outed myself was on a house call. And I remember being sort of like terrified after that because there were strangers on that call that I didn't know, and wondering what would happen or if I wouldn't be taken as seriously just sort of talking about being a trans person. And I guess my main worry was just that people would kind of roll their eyes about that being relevant or not. So I mean, I think, you know, for me, it really is around like space. We need to make space for people's stories. Stories are everything.
Go ahead, Mia.
I was gonna say, you know, I think for me, it happened when when I was kind of in the moving up in my career. My parents had assimilated. It wasn't a time where being Latino was something to be proud of. It was definitely something to mask. Stereotypes were rampant. And so my parents taught me very quickly, no Spanish in public, you know, dress like everyone, talk like everyone, bring your voice down. And it's like, so I knew right away that something was different about me, and that it needed to fly under the radar. I just needed to be kind of like everyone else. And it wasn't until I went into my professional career, I think on my third job, when I fell into the check mark, right? Like the organization at the time was Sprint Mobile, or what you know now as T-Mobile. And at the time, there were no Sprint stores. I'm totally dating myself. But it was a time that they did have an agency that was a Hispanic agency, and I was the only Hispanic woman in the entire mobile area. And so they're like, well, she's going to be in charge of our ad agency. Now, I had the background, but I really was the only one that could speak Spanish. So it was really, you know, I knew that was me. But it was really, I took that as an opportunity to learn, as an opportunity to inform, because one of the things that we had done as a brand at the time was, if we were going to market to Hispanics, we were marketing the lowest end phone that came free with your plan, because the stereotype or the thinking or the strategy at the top level was they can't afford much, so we're only going to target the low end phones. And I thought that was very wrong. I was like, well, you know, that's not my experience. My experience is that, you know, we were the first to really have smartphones. And when I go to Verizon, or when I go to, you know, at the time it was like, there were so many Singular and all of these other phones back then. They were marketing the high end phone to everyone, to all Latinos. And I was like, these guys have hit the mark. And then I showed the statistics about, you know, how Latinos adopt technology. And it was a huge learning for a Sprint brand. This is a huge brand. And yet these stereotypes were dominating their marketing. So when I realized that, I was like, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for me to, you know, embrace who I am, to be proud of who I am, but to inform people that we are not, you know, the low end phone. We are not all a monolith. We do have behaviors that are different. We, you know, and so to me, it became very much a mission, I think, that I took on, and it became a passion. And I started finding myself becoming more of who I was meant to be. And then I learned how much I had code switched, and how I started becoming very aware of my patterns, the racist systems that really led to all of these decisions, you know, that were affecting my career, were affecting my friends who were BIPOC and their careers. And I just continued to work on that, but it wasn't something, you know, I don't know that you just wake up and, but something in you does speak to you. It's a reflection, it's an internal dialogue that happens where you feel compelled to be authentic for yourself, and then you feel the need to be authentic for others to be able to be themselves.
Shakela, you responded when she said when Mia talked about, you know, being her authentic self. So tell us what's on your mind when it comes to that.
You know, actually, I can actually say that I think that I have been my authentic self. I don't think that I've in the past been looked at as someone who had like a lot of knowledge or information to give, because I did not look like people who were the ones, you know, doing the conferences, talking or giving information or having, you know, or leading meetings and things like that. I think a lot of times in organizations, which I've talked about before, is that people want to mentor people that look like them compared to seeing something in you and saying, oh, this person is great, but they just need this, this, and that. And then somebody else who doesn't look like you taking you under their wing and really helping you to grow. I think to me, that was a bigger issue. I think I've always kind of been myself. I've always had a mindset of nobody's going to push me out kind of mentality, which is why I think I've also stayed working in this field for so long, because I was determined that I was not going to get pushed out compared to like leaving on my own or really like helping the community that I really love, and chose to say that this is more than just about animals, which I've been saying for years. I've always said it's 10% pets and 90% people issues. And so I've always like kind of stuck to that. And I also did Young Life. So I think that that also helped me, because there are different skills that I learned with Young Life, which were like, you know, earning the right to be heard. So going to any community that is my own, but still not necessarily being accepted in your own community, depending like what kind of job you have, because people can still see you as an outsider, even if you look like them, right? Because you're there for a different purpose. But when you know that you're there to help assist and really get other people to grow, then I think that's what made me kind of stick to it. In regards to what other people may think or thought about me, I think that helped me to like really stick with it, is that I knew that I was going to really try to help people and continue to help community members and pet owners. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and you can see the chat is blowing up, especially about you, Shakela, and your 29 years. You have me beat by 7, but maybe I can catch up with you in the end. You know, we have a few questions in the chat, and I'll start with that. Shakela, there's a question from an anonymous attendee. They want to know what the R and REI stands for.
So it's race, because again, ours is based upon when we first started it, most of the staff members were African American. Like we do have other staff members, but that's what they focused on. Also in the community that we serve, again, this does not just translate just to in-house HRA. Our goal is to also have changes that how we deal with the community, because we are mostly dealing with community members who are African American as well. So they chose to do race, equity, and inclusion instead of just diversity. So of course that's included, but they did choose to go from that point first. Our Jasmine Bell, who is head of our HR, who does like our talent and DEI stuff, she can go definitely into more details. If you send me your information, I'll definitely send y'all her link, her email address, but they definitely go into more details about why HRA has chosen race and not just diversity. Is because based upon our staff members and also our community that we serve, and just the historical things. I think if other shelters really looked at not necessarily diversity in like, oh, you have blue hair, you have tattoos and things like that. But if you look at your staff members who are BIPOC or who are people of color, you can see like, oh, this person's been here for 20 years and they're still a caretaker. They've left out because they were, you know, being treated incorrectly and things like that. So to me, that's the reason why we have chosen that, is to help in-house, but also the outside part of it.
Thank you. Well, you know, it's funny that you say that the way you know, whatever people thought of you kept them from asking you to speak at conferences. And I remember the first time I heard you talk, I was like, she's fantastic. Like, I want her to start teaching people across the country that like the answers to your questions were so spot on. I mean, it was, or the questions you were asked. So anyway, I just, you know, it's amazing. And maybe my bias is the fact that, well, your information was terrific, but part of my bias might be that you look like the people I grew up with, you talk like the people I grew up with. So I'm like, hey, this is perfect for me. And so I think that's also a factor as well. But there's a question from another anonymous attendee, and they wanted us to talk a little bit about the difference between equity and inclusion. Equity and equality. They have a board member that wants to use equality rather than equity because they feel like they don't want to get caught up in any scandals like what that happened with like Target, BlackRock, Bud Light, and they want to hire a third-party DEI consultant to talk about the subject and provide coaching. But insist that a DEI consultant will be biased to use the word equity. I'm at a loss at how to move forward because this is a culture change we need to embrace unconditionally. Does the panel have any advice or input about that?
Well, for me, there's a big distinction, right? Equality to me is treating everybody the same.
Yeah.
Whereas equity, it's more about looking at that individual and seeing how can we ensure that this person is on an equal playing field with his peers. So I think it's a huge distinction. Not unlike I think we've all seen that graphic that has, the people and the boxes, and saying that if you're all in the same box, you're equal. But if one of you can't see over the fence, you're still not equal, right? You're all standing on the same size box, but we are not equal people. We are not all looking over the fence. So it's, to me, you are missing out on the true definition and probably one of the more important pieces of DEI, which is the equity piece, which is looking at everything from that person individually, their strengths, and even pay equity, right? So it really goes beyond let's make sure that men, women, are treated in the equal manner, which is very unrealistic, I think. I think the more realistic and more attainable is equity, and really looking at the individuals, what they bring to the table, and then equitably, assessing their needs or equitably paying them against their peers. So I think it's a pretty important distinction that you would lose out on if you made it equality.
What about you, Rory? I see you shaking your head. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. And I think that, the other part of it, I would just encourage absolutely finding a third party who is open to explaining the nuanced difference between equality and equity, because they are quite different. And I think Mia put it really well, I think equity is making sure everybody has everything that they need to succeed. And equality is like giving everybody the same tools to succeed, and people need different tools and space and time. And, Shaq mentioned mentorship, right? So all of these things I think are incredibly important. I also think, the backlash piece is part of the work. So I'm not sure, like, I think that we need to sort of like resituate ourselves with what we're comfortable with and what we're uncomfortable with. Because when I see that there's going to be like backlash to equity work, I wonder what's the other harm, right? Because I think there's more harm in not doing the work than in backlash of people disagreeing with equity work. So I would just keep trying to push that message that this is about undoing harm. And if people are upset and offended by undoing harm, keep asking questions about why.
It's a great point. Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's like you both said, I mean, as an industry, whether it's with inside the shelter or with people, we recognize that they are individuals. We used to think just about the animals as individuals, right? We didn't even look at people. And we understand that people are what power this whole engine, and that we all have our different needs. And it's so easy to say, well, you know, I was in the grocery store the other day, and there was a lady trying to reach for a kerosene bottle that was like on the third shelf. And it would be easy for me to say, well, it's the same height for all of us, so why can't you just get it, right? But I walked up to her, and one of our attendees said it perfectly. Equity is about taking action to resolve the issue. And so I asked her, hey, would you like me to get that for you? And provided her with with equity by, she has the same access to kerosene as I do, because of me being able to support her. And that's what we're talking about, right? So I have a question for you, Shakela. Tell us what can an animal welfare organization do to take, what steps can they take to ensure that their programs and services are accessible and equitable for individuals from all backgrounds?
So are you talking about like in-house, or, because in my mind, this work, DEI work, REI work, to me is is shelter, but it's also toward the community. So are you talking about in-house, out-house?
I get the feeling you have excellent information about both. So I'd be more than happy to hear both.
Well, first of all, I think that it definitely starts at the top, because everything, if you have a leader that is on board with saying, hey, we need to do the work, then it can trickle down. Usually it's hard to start at the middle or even at the bottom and say, hey, we need to start some things that needs to start changing. But I think for the community piece, people talk about like that kind of equity work and inclusion. People don't usually ask the community like what they need. They usually assume we're going to give them this, and that. We're going to go and offer them this, and that, without even going to the community first to talk to the community, to talk to other groups that are working with the community, just to get their thoughts about things. Because in-house, you would talk to me, in my mindset, you would also talk to the staff members. So you're really starting with the people who are considered, I guess, the stakeholders in and out. But most groups start with the higher ups and things like that, but I don't think that that's a good move, because sometimes people who are in higher positions, they're not seeing some of the issues because there are people who are in place that kind of stop some of the issues before it gets to the top. So they may not even know all of these things have happened, but this person right here knows everything, and it stops here and it just goes back down and never reaches the top. So I think that the leader has to be aware and be willing to say, hey, we've noticed these issues. These are some things that we need to do. And they are a part of that. But not only that, but also including the people that it affects. Because a lot of groups, as I'm just reading online, dealing with different DEI work, REI work, is that they always want to consult an outside group. But have you even talked to staff members who are in-house to see what some of the issues are? I don't think people ask, hey, this group of people who've been working here 10 years, what do you think is going on? And I think that also people say what's going on, but then people don't want to hear what's going on because they don't want to have to do anything about it. So those are like that's just some of the basic issues of whether or not they're willing to listen to what the actual issues and problems are.
Yeah.
I'm
No, that's
honestly,
perfect.
sorry,
Go ahead.
I'm
Go ahead. No,
honestly
go ahead.
so shocked when you said 29 years before our call and before we started this. Number one, because I thought, okay, then you must be like, what, 2 years old when you started. But the other part is that I think longevity, I have to give you props for the longevity, because I have absolutely left an organization because it was exhausting to be, not to do my job, exhausting to do my job that also required, cultural insights, but the way people viewed that at the time was, well, it's a translation service, you were put in a box. And I found it very exhausting to navigate organizations, to be informing, to be working in DEI and working my day job. And I think that at some point when, you're right, people go to the outside, oh, what's wrong? I don't know what's going on inside. Well, you've never really asked anybody on the inside what's going on. And you've never really given us the tools or safe spaces to be able to, and when we have tried, it's like we're coming up against the wall, like you said, these gatekeepers, Vincent, are everywhere. And if you can't get through one, that's where your career ends many times.
Yes.
So there are a lot of factors that can affect, not just your mental health,
Yep.
but the fact that it can affect your career, and sometimes you have to leave in order to grow. But there is something to be said for someone that has found a home where they can grow, where they can learn, where they can also give back. Not saying it has been easy, because I can't imagine that it has. Just saying that there's a lot of resilience and strength in you for, battling those challenges. And still, I think, like many of us that continue to stay on, it's because we have a higher purpose, because we feel compelled to really elevate our communities, and we do it through this job. So I just gotta say though, girl, you look fantastic.
Well, and we were getting quite a few questions in the comments or in the Q&A. So I'm going to start with the next one. This is a really a great question by Sarah. Her question is, and it's Sarah Muriello. She asked, can you comment on the white supremacy culture, how it negatively impacts racial equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts in animal sheltering, and what responsibility white people in the industry should have in dismantling it? I'll start off with an answer to that question if no one else has one. I think one of the biggest things that I have recognized is that there's a lot of people that, so for instance, when I started, there was no chat rooms, there was no social media. And what I've discovered in the age of social media is that people say very different things when they think that they're amongst their trusted group than they say to your face. Like the same person that's telling you that they would never use certain words actually use them. So to answer your question about what white people can do to dismantle it, is to call it out, especially in those areas where people like me will never be invited to. We'll never see it, but it'll be happening around us. I've had on in shelters people that will say, hey, I'm so sorry about the racism you're experiencing. And they won't tell me exactly what they're talking about, but I know because I get the messages, like names over Facebook or whatever, or different conversations I have one-on-one. But I think that's the number one thing I would say, is that white people can be a big ally for someone like me by checking people when it happens, but then also I feel like there's a lot of room for us to have open conversations, because I don't believe that people, just because they have certain thoughts, should be ignored or wiped away as if they don't exist. That's the part of the inclusion that I'm really a supporter of. I believe in inviting people to a new possibility, but that white supremacy system is in place, and it's baked into everything we do. Even if someone like me can take advantage of a white supremacist system, if I'm an animal control officer and I issue a citation to a person I know that the system is going to slam, then I'm also using it. So it's not always about color. A lot of times it's about the system that's in place. And I also know that you go to a certain door in a certain neighborhood, you cannot take as many liberties as you could in another place. And that's always in the back of, I can tell you, in the back of many people's minds. I've learned to stop doing that over the years, but it's something that is, I think one of the biggest things is, when it comes to race, to treat people, especially when it comes to the law, to treat people, I would say, equally, in terms of, if you're going to address someone in a certain way of one race, then it should be across the board the same way. But I will open it up for the panel to discuss, instead of monopolizing the conversation.
There's a word I really want to mention, and that's safety, because that's the very first thing that I thought about as you spoke, is the fact that we are not in a safe world. We do have to be careful. I think about, there are many times when I have a 10-year-old son, and his friends' parents, will say, well, I try to bring my kids up right. I'm reading them these books. I'm doing all these diversity things. And, I think that's great. I'm glad that you're informing yourself. But I think one of the things I definitely ask, my friends to do with their children that are being raised with mine is, it's one thing, I think it's great that you're informing your child, but I think what's most important to me is that if my child was in danger, like, will your child stand up for mine? Will your child walk mine home? Will your child, be there when he needs the help, when he needs that allyship actively? And I think that I do absolutely feel that the leaders and white counterparts have a responsibility that is not, unfortunately, for me to dictate. It really does take it within themselves to do that and really understand and reflect. And I think this is one of the most important points about DEI, that DEI is an internal process. It is not only an external process. It is not a process about just learning about racist systems, about learning about other cultures. It's truly about examining the way you think. When you see a Black person coming your way, what is your thought? And how do you rebuild what has been programmed in you? And how do you continue to begin to see things from different lenses? And it requires high involvement on your part. And the thing that I wish more of our leaders did was encourage that self-reflection, encourage that awareness that will, hopefully eventually keep my child safe. And, I feel like even when we think about, LGBTQIA, I worry for the safety of that community. Saying love is not enough. Keep my friends safe. And that is, I think, the most important thing for me than, just in a blanket saying, well, I need them to dismantle, white supremacy. I really need you to look within yourself, do the work, and help keep us safe.
Rory, can you speak to, because the white supremacy, and I feel like it is also a driver of a lot of the bias against the LGBTQIA community. Could you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, trans people are 3 times more likely, for example, to be the victim of violent crime than non-trans people in the US, and that number triples for brown and black folks. So, I think we're in the trans community, there's so much visibility when it comes to BIPOC trans folks. And I think, they're targeted, we're targeted, right? So laws right now, there are about 350 something laws that are up that are anti-trans across the country. That's double what it was last year. And they're targeting reproductive justice, which is, largely led by BIPOC women and trans women. So all of the intersectionality within, especially this legislation, is wild. I would say, again, like to that, like just knowing about what's happening within intersections of your community, I think is really powerful. I really appreciate what you said, Mia, and I keep thinking, Shaq, about what you said about mentorship and the lack of mentorship. And this psychological safety, but also physical safety, is so real right now. I mean, for all marginalized groups, I think it has been real, and we're just starting to talk about it more and, bring more attention to it. And it's actually getting published in the news rather than just sort of like swept under the rug, the harm that and death and murder that BIPOC and queer and trans communities are dealing with. As far as like whiteness, I do want to talk a little bit about that, if that's okay. I think that, like I'm a white person. I try to find more and more space to talk about DEI issues. And, I think that like what you said, Mia, where you said like this is not just about learning, it's about practice. I think that's kind of what you were saying. Like I totally agree with that. And I just want to kind of like give a little bit of like give some ideas around like what that actually looks like. So if you hear someone say something that you think is racist as a white person, like Mia said, call it out, find a time to follow up about that and talk about why that hurt you and why you think that's harmful, right? Like all of this is about like reducing harm and trying to make the world safer. Have curiosity, like I think like having some kind of journal practice, having a therapist who is invested in, if you're really serious about being a white person who's doing DEI work, this is going to be hard and you're going to screw up, and you have to get comfortable with not being perfect and figuring out how to apologize and when to not take that space up, and find some therapy, find a journal practice, find a mindfulness practice where you can really think at the end of every day and the beginning of every day what your intentions are and how your whiteness has informed harm that you're doing. And that could be little things, right? Like you mentioned, like noticing someone walking towards you, like notice that in your body, pay attention to it, write it down and try to do better next time. I think that is like the thing that has been like a guiding force for me as a white person, is like, we're always going to screw up. Everybody is, like cis people are going to screw up with trans people. White folks are going to screw up around racism. We're living in a racist system. Like we are always part of that system, and we're like breaking it apart by noticing it and by trying to do better next time by reducing that harm. So I always try to think to myself like, okay, I screwed up. How am I not going to screw up in the same way to the same degree next time? Like, what did I learn from this that makes it better? And I'm sorry, I feel like I'm taking up a lot of space with this question, but I also feel like, you know, if you are in a position of leadership, as you get more power and authority, make sure that you're using that for your platform, like whatever platforms you have to like bring folks of color in. And then also like do the behind the scenes work. When I was at AMPA and I was working with Claire Callison, love Claire Callison, we were working on DEI work. I would try to take off the sort of like grunt work part of the logistics planning around our DEI work and things like this. So just think about that and like, what would you want someone to take off your plate if this was something that, like if racism, for example, was your reality every day? Like how can you make the work a little bit easier for the folks that are having to fight in this struggle all the time? Because it's a choice for white folks to be in this struggle.
Thank you so much, Rory. That was perfect. I wanted to let you go as long as possible because you were spot on. So thank you so much. I have one last question, everybody. And remember what I said, what the word rapid fire means. This is our last question. And for each of the panelists, if you had to start at square one in improving DEI in an organization, what would you do first?
The basic is ERGs, provide safe spaces for like communities, because, and I mean, not provide ERGs that employee resource groups that have, you know, champions, because they do this all the time. I've been in organizations that give you a Latino resource group, and then the champion is a white leader so that he can sit in and listen to you. And because of this fear, like, oh my God, they're going to organize and riot. But, you know, like the basic, let's provide safe spaces for people that feel exhausted, or for people to connect, for people to think, ideas, how to bring things up to leadership. So that's my rapid fire.
Yes, there we go, Shakela.
So I would definitely say again that the leader, as Mia and Rory talked about, looking within yourself. I think to me that is one of the most important things, because you can't lead from a point of your own bias. Like you may say, yeah, I'm gonna let these Black people have a group, I'm gonna let these Latinos have a group, but you may not even agree with it or have any type of feeling behind it. So I think that it's important that we do check our own implicit bias first, and it starts with the leader.
Rory, where would you start?
Oh man, this is like a loaded question for me, because I've made really bad choices in this space, or like worked on projects that like completely flopped with DEI. So I think understanding like but like, again, learning from mistakes, right? Like always trying to learn from mistakes and not stop because something is hard. So I think that is the advice that I would give, is that just know going into this that sometimes you're not going to get it right. How can you make sure, like talk to other organizations about failures that they've encountered. I'm happy to talk about failures that I've encountered and successes as well. So that we're all like collectively doing this work. So that would be my and also set goals. Like, I don't know. I think that, yeah, like treat this like it's as serious as every other goal within your organization.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I would just to piggyback on that is to be clear about your intention at the beginning, and understand your role, whether it's as a support or as someone who is actually able to lead that initiative, and also lead with your heart. All right. So we are at the end. Oh my goodness gracious. I could have talked to y'all all night. We're probably going to share a conversation or two at an upcoming conference. I can already see it. And also I'd love to have you all back too, whether it's in your specific expertise and or on another DEI discussion. So let me thank everybody for being here. The panelists were fabulous. And if you didn't get, if we didn't get to your question, please email us at haas-project@americanpetsalive.org. As a reminder, tonight's webinar recording will be distributed within the next 3 days. In a moment, you'll get a brief poll about the webinar pop-up. Please take a moment to complete and let us know what your thoughts are about tonight's content and webinar before you go. And then also our next webinar will be on Thursday, July 6th, right after Independence Day for some of us, on the topic of 2023 animal-related legislation, featuring some of our incredible policy team at Austin Pets Alive and our Haas attorney. That's going to be Katie Draw, and our Haas attorney is Lauren Loney. My team will share a registration link in the chat. Please keep an eye out for our email for more details. And thank you for being here tonight. And we'll see you again very soon. We love all of you. We're here for you. You're always on our mind. And go out there and continue to do the good work that you're doing.